Okay. Kwaba, welcome. I want to say greetings to all, but before we start, I'm going to ask Sister Sensa Raneb to open the space and bring in all the powerful energies of the universe as before we begin the knowledge spotlight today.
Dwao, thank you for giving me this opportunity. I will first start by apologizing for not giving you a visual. I am in the middle of doing something. Aneneneter itayam keper onk, which means I submit to the highest powers that come in many forms of life. I ask that the ancestors, the enlightened ancestors, those who have come before us and done the work for us to set the stage for today, to gather here as we speak so that truth and power can be shared, so that actions can be derived, so that connections can be taken. We ask that the direct ancestors of those on the call, Sankofa, Dr. Hassiem, Sean Libbard from Knowledge Bookstore, that their enlightened ancestors, their ancestors not yet enlightened, but can be used as a transportation system to tap into the all and find the source of the knowledge. May they open the path of communication. We ask that you individually speak an ancestor's name, for when we call upon the ancestor and speak their name, they gain eternal life. I will start with my grandfather, Israel Murcott Taylor.
Marcus Messiah Garvey, Ashe.
Ashe. Ashe.
We call one, we call all.
For those whose names were called and not called, for those who pass through our mind's eye, for those we know and don't know, we love you all. Ashe. Anacharak.
Ashe, Ashe, Ashe. It is good. Things shall be good.
He's doing his handwriting. Yeah. Which style you guys aspire to?
We're going to ask our visitors as they enter to mute themselves as we continue the journey. So thank everybody, Akwaba. We're going to go on this journey. So first of all, I want to welcome our good brother Hassiem. Greetings, my brother.
Greetings to you, my brother. Thank you for having me.
How is the day where you are? Because wherever I'm at, sun is shining her rays down on us.
Yes. I'm coming from the sunny state of Florida.
Hey, we have some experience up there. There was a group of Africans who was there a while there was a group here, and we always have our connection. So let us start off though by talking about names.
Yes.
Your names. I want you to tell us how they came to you.
Yes. Well, my first name is Hassiem, and that name means strong. And my middle name is Ayali, and it means confident. And the last name, or the third name, is Kambui, and it means fearless. Those names came to me through my mother. Let me explain. I was born Donald Ray Owens. However, later, and we can go into more detail into this, later I went through an African Rites of Passage program. And as a result of going through that program, I went to my mother and shared with my mother that we shared with my mother that I wanted to change my name. And what I mean by that is that I explained to her that our names had been taken away, or they had been lost during the process of African ancestral enslavement. However, now that we are in the position to take our names back, I wanted to have a name that represented who I was. And so she went out. I know earlier we were talking, or you made mention about Dr. Malifi Kete Asante's work. And it so happened one of the books that made me aware of the elder was a book on African names that he wrote. My mother actually went out and got a book on African names, and she then chose from that book new names. In which case, once she chose those names, I ended up actually changing my name legally and became who I am today.
Oh wow. And that it's everything is a journey and a process.
Right.
How old are you? Because not every day somebody said, listen, I want the names, change. So how old were you and what caused that?
Right. And so to go a little bit more into detail, I grew up, my mother was in the military. And so I had the experience of traveling throughout the United States, spent some time in Puerto Rico. However, a majority of my time, I grew up in Hawaii. And Hawaii is a very multicultural place, very similar to my understanding to how Toronto is. They have a lot of different groups of people and then they interact with each other. Very similar to Hawaii. I grew up around different Asian groups, just many different ethnic groups beyond Asians, several East Indians. So it was a very, how can I say, a very multicultural environment. So you had these different racial and ethnic groups who practice different cultures. And for the most part, everybody got along. And so in growing up in Hawaii, once I graduated, my mother retired from the military and I ended up moving to North Carolina. And so in that experience, I actually applied and actually went to college at the North Carolina State University. And that experience was eye-opening because I went from an environment, as I shared before, that was very multicultural, that consisted of many different groups of people and that interacted to one another, to then moving over to the South, so to speak, where it was very, how can I say, if I wanted to use this term or this phrase, very white and black. And so I didn't see a lot of the multiculturalism and diversity that I saw growing up. And so that experience had a toll, and I'll be a little bit more specific. And some people can probably relate in the viewing audience is that I remember, or I recall walking, I was leaving my dorm room to go to class and walking, and nobody would, look you in the face or nobody would greet you, particularly as an African. Nobody would talk to you. And I thought that was very weird, and so, just recognizing those things perhaps, and also during that same time along with that, I had academic issues in college. And then around that same time, I was actually going to drop out of school. Well, not drop out of school. However, I was going to fail out of school because my academics were below the standard by which you can continue to take classes. And so in figuring out the environment, as you said earlier, it's a process, figuring out the environment, definitely not trying to fail out of school because I didn't want to disappoint my mother. Trying to navigate that, there was a lot of stress on me. And I remember during that time, I actually enrolled in a undergraduate course. It was like a 100 level course.
Yes.
I wanted to do that, or I needed to do that so that I could bring my GPA up. So it wasn't to the point where I was stressed out, where I couldn't make a decision about what to do. I did make a decision about what to do, however, still yet, because again, my experience from leaving Hawaii, which is very multicultural, to coming to North Carolina and being in that environment and experiencing how we interact with one another, but also with others, something was still missing. And so that's when I ended up meeting a African-American, as I shared. He was a clinical psychologist, but also an African traditional healer by the name of Dr. Kwabena Fahim Ashanti. And so this meeting was very, very interesting. And a lot of times, everybody has their particular journey, in terms of how they come into, and people tend to use this word very loosely, however, how they come into consciousness or become more aware of themselves and their environment.
Yes.
And so while I'm in my meeting with Dr. Ashanti, that first meeting was very similar. When I walked in there and I was sharing with him what my concerns were, he listened very intently. However, he asked me, after all that, he asked me a question, a very simple question. And that question was, who are you? And so I started to tell him what I thought or I perceived who I was. And he said, I hear you, I hear you telling me these things. However, you're not telling me who you are. And I'm thinking, in my mind, I said, because again, this is, and I'll get into this a little bit more in terms of our brain and how our brain processes information. However, he particularly said, you're telling me what you are, what you do, but you're not telling me who you are. And so that he ended up started talking a little bit more about this program he had. Dr. Ashanti had run a program at the university to help African-American students navigate, for example, their environment. So the university that I went to, again, North Carolina State, there's approximately, out of maybe 30,000 students at that time, at the most 6% of that was African-American students. Yeah. So he had a program that he ran in essentially an African Rites of Passage program at the university, where he helped students transition through the university. However, that program was much, much more. Yes, it was allowed the students to be able to get out of school, but also find a purpose. And so this program occurred every Wednesday night in, at that time, the Multicultural Counseling Center at North Carolina State University. And he ran that program every semester. So every semester would be fall and spring semester. And occasionally he would do it in the summertime as well, depending on, students were always seeing him all the time. However, if he could gather students in the group, he would have a group counseling session in the summer. And so that's what happened. I got invited to that program. And this is now leading up to my name change. So the first class I went to, he talked about, for example, race. And race is a hotbed topic a lot of times, right?
True.
You hear different conversations about race. And I'll just be real direct for the purposes of what I'm talking about with me and my name change was, we learned about race in the sense that race as the elder, of course, Dr. John Henry Clark had expressed many times before, and also Marcus Garvey, some other individuals, some of the great elders express, race, what you mean by race is connected to a land area. And so he put up an example, I would never forget this, put up an example of a globe, of the world. And he said to the class, well, first he asked us, name the different races. And again, we understand, or some people tend to understand race in terms of color. So some of the students yelled out black, white, yellow, those words of color that we tend to use associated with race. So at that time, he had an assistant, and she wrote that down on the board. And he said, okay, well, and he put up and after everybody got the response and the information was written on the board, he put up a picture of a map of the world. And on the map of the world, right, you see all of the different regions, land areas, continental land masses, right? And he asked, well, show me. He honed in, he said, well, show me a black land. And then everybody paused. Everybody looked, like looking at the map, looking at what they've written, looking at the response. Logically, or reasoning it, there was no black land per se. There was Europe for the Europeans, all right? There was Asia, all right? And more specifically, of course, you can look at France for the French. You go to Africa for the Africans. So that was the awakening beyond the shock that I had in terms of being able to identify myself. Yes. And then from there, that is when he mentioned about the idea of, again, each of these races or each of these groups, they all wear, he would say, okay, so if you're African, what type of name would you wear? And everybody said, they paused. What? And he said, well, you would wear an African name, right? And he said, if you were French, what type of name would you wear? And so from that experience, from that first class, that was just the first class, and that was just one piece of it. I said, well, man, if I'm African, I need to have an African name. Now, mind you, one of the things that I had also expressed to my teacher at that particular point in time is I'm a very logical individual, meaning that I grew up, I was very oriented towards mathematics and things of that nature. And that's why my undergraduate degree in part was physics. I actually wanted to do astronomy, but they didn't have that particular program in college, so I went into physics. And so when I saw that and the picture and the visuals, that clicked for me. And so that first day, because one of the things about the program is you have to choose a name, an African name for yourself. You need to know the meaning of it, where it comes from. And then, of course, later on, you do another project in relationship to it. And so from that first class, that is when I learned the importance of names, and that each race has a name or names that they have respective of that group. And they have meaning, right? And so, and that meaning further speaks to your personality, and then your thoughts and behaviors and things of that nature. And so that is a little bit more in terms of how I was able, or how I chose the names. Now, at that time when I was in the group, since I picked up on that very early on, I actually chose another name. But I went to, and I will never forget this because, and I didn't know this, I assumed, because I thought, again, I'm a logical person. And so when information is presented and it makes sense, I normally move out on it. And so I went to Dr. Ashanti and I said, oh, Doc, I'm going to change my name. And he looked at me, he said, you know what, Hassiem, you are only one of the few who went through that process. You know, a lot of them did it in the program and had their names in that way. However, I was only one of the few, and I was shocked. I was thinking, how is that so? However, though, later on, which we'll get into, and I'll just cut this short in terms of how I got my name. Later on, I realized why that was the case.
Yes. So yeah, and as I said, you know, it's a process.
Right.
It's as if, you know, going to the rites of passage. Naming is the initial first thing, right? And your name is an instruction. So whatever energy we're giving your name, we're giving you an instruction, you know. So when you say Sankofa, you're like, go to the roots, go forward, take the best. So you could keep moving. So names, man. So let's talk about more names. Afrocentricity, Afrocentric. Now, from you being in a session and we see Baba Ashanti in your life, Elder Ashanti, it's a whole another movement to bring you to what you've been doing these days, centering everything around Afrocentricity and be very clear. Because we're talking about being clear, because if you're an African and talk about Afrocentric, when you're attacked, if you're not clear, you don't have any self-confidence. So tell me that journey, Afrocentric.
Wow. Yeah, you brought up some great points, so thank you. And yes, the naming is the first step. It is, and the reason why I talk about that, I often highlight that quite a bit in my books, and sometimes it gets overlooked. And if you think about it this way, so for example, I think with COVID, many of us have been locked into in our environment and may not have gotten out as much. So possibly we picked up a few extra pounds. And so we perhaps may want to be motivated to lose a little bit or get back more in shape. However, what people tend to not realize is the hardest part of actually thinking about getting in shape and getting in shape is taking that first step. And in the same way, that's with the names. The name is the first step, because when you think about Afrocentricity, or specifically what I learned is the Afrocentric Pan-African approach, is that we tend to, that name is the first step in terms of how you see yourself, and then that which you project yourself out, or how you interact with the environment. So that has to be, you know, that shows it's important. And if you can do that, then that simple instruction, that first simple instruction of naming yourself, then carries over to other instructions, or what I would call behaviors, by which you carry out as a result of being able to define yourself. All right, so with Afrocentric Pan-Africanism, or Afrocentricity as a collective term, when I met Dr. Ashanti and I went through the program, I later became what is considered a Timbuktu. So as many of your viewers may know, some of the oldest universities come from the African continent. Now, Timbuktu is well known because it speaks to the university in Mali, so Timbuktu. And so I became a teacher, a co-teacher, a co-lead. And I didn't know, I didn't understand this whole process and what Dr. Ashanti was doing. However, I was learning as I was going along. And this whole approach, this whole education and training program was, again, based off the concept of Afrocentricity. And all that is, and I'll be very, very simple, is Afrocentricity consists of two words, Africa and center, okay? Africa itself, that's self-defining. As I told you earlier, when I met with Dr. Ashanti, and one of the first lessons that I learned very on about race, and him putting up a picture of the world in different regions, we all know, for example, if we all look at different land masses, there's only one Africa, right? And so that's self-defining in itself. Everybody knows what Africa is, okay?
Yeah.
Center, okay, is that. It's the middle point, or the middle point, or distinguished common point, as somebody would say. And so when you bring those two words together, Africa and center, what it does is that focus point of center, it brings your attention to Africa. And what about Africa? Well, we're looking at, okay, so we're focusing on the culture and environments of the African continent. And what I mean by environments is because you have the race collectively, so all of us here are Africans. However, though, we represent different ethnic groups. That's our lineage. Our lineage, we all come from different ethnic groups that spanned out over time across the continent and elsewhere throughout the globe. And so that is Afrocentricity in a nutshell, without being too complicated. All right.
So Mutabaruka is a dub poet, and then one of my favorite whaler is Pita, or we could say Peter Touch. Now, Peter Touch said, no matter where you come from, as long as you're Black, right, he's an African. Right. Tell me how you come, what is Pan-Africanism?
Right.
I want to hear, because you're a definer of words and concepts.
So as I shared, so Afrocentricity can be looked at as a collective term, all right? And then there are different approaches by which individuals focus on different culture and environments of the African continent, all right? And that can also include different approaches, all right? But again, because us as African people exist throughout the whole globe, then you're relating the culture and environments of Africa, for example, to an African that is in Toronto, that is in the US, that is in India, that is in Caribbean, that is in the Caribbean. In other words, you know, what are the beliefs, for example, attitudes, styles, you know, behaviors that we display as African people wherever we are. So that is what Pan-African is. It involves all Africans, and then the different cultural indicators, for example, that we have, regardless of where we are dispersed. I use that word, dispersed, in the world. So that's what Pan-African is, focusing again on Africa.
Well, no, I'm gonna go in a little bit deep. You know, folks, keep bringing in your questions. We're gonna ask a few more, and then we'll look at some questions after. But I'm gonna go in a little bit deep here, and I want to touch on maybe, I'd say, four items I'm gonna put forward to you: spirituality / religion,
right,
education / culture,
right,
economics / politics.
right.
I want to speak to you about those. Let's just leave it at those three things, and you can combine economics and politics.
Right.
How important for us to rebuild African nationhood? And do you agree with me that spirituality and religion is the point where we start and then go down the list?
Yes, I would agree in part that, well, yes, spirituality and religion are very important in terms of our economic development, which doesn't get talked a lot about. You often hear the word spirituality. However, spirituality and religion are two different things. And I would further argue that let me say this. There's a lot of elders that I have met in my journey. And one of them is Professor James Smalls. I met him probably when I was 19. I didn't know who he was. And not to say that he's not important, I just didn't know who he was because I was transitioning, things of that nature, in terms of knowing more about myself and the African world and the different scholars that have written about it. However, I recall meeting him, great brother, very down to earth. He wasn't even in his own glory and the things that he's accomplished. He wasn't standoffish or anything. I remember that from my first meeting. Matter of fact, I met him through my teacher, Dr. Shanti, came to he used to hold an holy religious conference in Durham, and actually he came to that. And so I'm bringing his name up because from time to time, I listen to the elder, and his stance is this, and as I go into this, is that Africans didn't have a religion, they had a sacred science. And to my elder, I would agree. They did have a sacred science, but I would also say that they also had a religion. And I'll explain that. So going back to what I said earlier with spirituality. Spirituality, for example, that is what is conceived in your mind about a supernatural being. All right. And I'm using these words to sort of communicate an understanding. Religion, on the other hand, is then whatever is then formed into the mind. Religion then is that behavior that you then practice in terms of how you understand that supernatural. And a lot of us call the supernatural God, or I mean, that's what you call in English, and that's a German word. Or you hear the Muslims, for example, Allah, or there's different words that we associate in our beliefs and comprehending of the supernatural. All right. Yeah. So spirituality is just that. Spirituality deals with the thought. Religion deals with the behavior. And this is why I say, yes, Professor Smalls, they did definitely have a sacred science, but they had a religion. And the religion that deals with spirituality, but also, again, in that sense of connection, how your service and worship to that which you understand. Yes. So if you don't have the religion, you're just idealizing, or you just have the thought, but that thought has to be completed in terms of the behavior. And so that's why spirituality and religion is important, because religion is the study of God and what the gods say. You talked about instructions. Your name is an instruction. Matter of fact, your name comes from, in African cultures, through our connection with the Creator. That's the first instruction that you get. And so and again, this speaks to sort of what I said earlier before about, for some people, it's very, very hard to, because of our experiences, whatever we had, for example, with what we call religion, some people add the adjective organized religion, because of our experiences, what we only know of the world, for example, through Islam, perhaps, or through Christianity, and those are just only the monotheistic religions. And that's only some of the few that's even in the United States. Because of our experience with that, our whole perspective on religion, we've attached a feeling to that, and we can't see religion for what it is, to be able to use it as a tool, for example, economic development. And this is where I get in, and this is why it's so important. And I think a lot of people tend to express that, well, some of the great organizers in histories didn't use religion. And yes, that's right. But you have to know that over time we evolve. And we evolve in the sense of being able to see what has been useful and what's not useful to then develop it. Because, for example, one of the greatest leaders in modern era and what he had accomplished in terms of the masses of African people here in the United States, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad used religion. And for him, it was the science of Islam, the science of Christianity, as I quoted in my book, the science of dealing with anything related to religion. So yes, you have spirituality, you have religion, but as I also write in my book, there are other concepts that are so important in our study to bring economic development. So in saying economic development, right, religion, why it's so important? Because it gives you the rules or instructions by which you can create economics. So I am, again, and I'll give you this example. I'm so excited to be here, and the brother Sean invited me on here. However, our relationship came together as a result of me practicing African traditional religion. In other words, I sent my book to Brother Sean. I spoke with him over the phone. I said, Brother Sean, this is my book. Would you review it? And if you would like to get copies of the book, I can provide that to you. We can have a working relationship, right? And in me doing that, he was open to that as well. And so what I did was I've actually sent him books, and in other words, that was a way for me to be able to create economics within its community. It helps him in the local area in Toronto, and it also helps me. And that's just between the two of us. That's just two. But imagine it on the wide scale. If everybody, for example, had African names as the first step, practice an African traditional religion, the way they would engage each other to be able to create, they would be organized to be able to create opportunities like that. And then as spider webs unite, they can tie up a line. You know, a lot of times I hear about the simplicity. For example, there's a brother out here speaking to, I can't recall, but, what attracted me to hearing this brother was a lot of times we think of our problems being so complex that we don't even take the first step, or we don't see the process to be able to get to the outcome that we want. And so that is essentially what religion does. Religion has ideas in there that allows you to take certain steps to be able to get the very thing that, and what I've heard in a lot of conversation, people complaining about, to be able to do for yourself. And it can be done.
Okay,
and
brother.
That's why I'm saying reparations. Reparations is not about the redistribution of wealth. If it is about the redistribution of wealth, it is about us, being able to be organized, creating the wealth, and then in turn redistributing that wealth over generations within the community.
Yeah. So brother, I'm taking you on a specific journey. You went to economics, and that's too soon.
Okay.
So I'm taking you back. I'm taking you black now.
Right.
So religion, spirituality,
right,
and the idea. And I wanted to, once we wrap up this part of that part, we're going to go to education next. Right. Then we'll politics and economics. The reason why I wanted to touch you, I don't know, but I have a feeling that you coined the term Pitta Rasset. So I want to talk about that concept. Then we'll get to education, then politics and economics. I'm gonna reel you in, Baba brother, and we gotta travel together. Let's go.
All right, let's go. Let's do it. So Pitta Rasset is a term that my teacher actually created, Dr. Kwabena Fahim Ashanti. So in the beginning, as I told you, about me and him meeting, and then me learning more and more. One of the areas that was actually a part of that program had to deal with religion. And so one of the things that he saw was, because a lot of times they always, and you tend to hear this a lot, Africa consists of many different cultures, ethnicities, to make it seem as if it's not a collective, right? Yes. But there is a collective. There's a lot of similarities. So there is one African culture with varying degrees of practices. In a similar way, that is what Dr. Ashanti saw with religion, and he created that term. That term stands for a collectiveness of African religion, and it comprises of 3 Kemetic words. So Ptah, all right, Ra, and Aset. And Ptah references the word of creation, right? Words matter. Words are so important. Words get people's attention. And that is why I would say a lot of times when you hear about individuals talking about white supremacy or racism or white European world domination, those types of things, in part, I can understand why they use those words, you know, because those words grab people's attention to get them to where they're trying to take them. And so I use that example to say that is where Ptah comes in and why that word of creation is powerful. You speak it. A lot of people talk about speaking things, of course, into existence. All right. Ra, as far as we know, and there's a lot of firsts. That's what I talk about too in my religion book about. There's so many things that we're still discovering on the African continent.
Yes.
The great elder, Dr. As well, Dr. Malifi Asante, same thing. I mean, he has, and I'm aware of one book because I happened to come across it. Besides the African name, I'm aware of another book called The History of Africa he wrote. I had a copy of it, and he's in, I think he's in the 3rd edition, but the copy I had was either the 1st or 2nd that he wrote in 2014. And so we're discovering a lot of things about first, so to speak, if that matters, you know? And so Ra is one of the oldest names that we know about the male creator of the universe, all right? And then Aset is one of the other major names that we know of the female creator goddess, right? And so when we think about African culture and African religion, Ptah Aset speaks to the collective name of African traditional religion, looking at the African gods. And that's a whole nother subject in itself in terms of what I mean by gods, because we have many gods, so plural. However, that does not negate the creator. There is the creator, just like in Christianity. You have Christianity, but you have numerous denominations of Christianity, right? And within Christianity, you have the creator, who they call God, but God also has helpers that are angels, things of that nature. But in African traditional religion, we have the supreme creator and the lesser gods, all right? Spirits and ancestors. So that is what Ptah Set is. It is the study of African historical and traditional religion, and focusing on the study, or excuse me, focusing on the service and our worship to our own racial gods.
So what if I told you a story? So 2005, I decided I have to go home. So we went to Ghana, Togo, and Benin. And one of the things I did was I attended the Vudan ceremony. and I was watching some Muslim brother at a roundabout, and the Vudan ceremony is gonna, the whole community in Benin was, you know, from Awida was coming, and they were gonna surround the brothers praying. So I'm watching because I'm like, I'm from the West, right? I'm from the West. What kind of conflict? I tell you this, it was like nothing changed. So somehow some of our family members recognize that Africa can unite from the old spiritual things, you know, with Mau and Yoruba, that could exist with Islam, you know, Hebrewism and Christianity.
Well, you actually brought up a good point. In one respect, I would say, yes, it can coexist with those religions you name. However, truly, those religions that are practiced by African people would contradict the definition of Africa and centered or Afrocentricity. Meaning that, okay, so in Toronto, again, for example, you have many different groups of people, and those groups of people, again, have their own group names and also have their religion, all right? And so in that instance, those groups of people, for example, that created Hebrewism would be practicing Hebrewism. Groups of people that created Christianity would be practicing that. And then Africans who created their own religions, collectively known as Patah, Ra, Set, and practice their own racial gods, they can exist from within, here's the key thing, from within their own cultural center, along with all cultural centers. But it is a contradiction for someone that's African to practice, for example, the religion of another cultural center. That person, we would say, would be off-centered. And so that is why, and you see that quite a bit on the continent, definitely with the spread of Islam. Islam is
let me stop you here, because now to do a quick rebuttal so you could address it.
Right.
When the elders teach us, they say that Akhenaten,
right.
Akhenaten said one.
Right.
Christianity emerged, all of them religion by the elder Ben Yakinen.
Right.
All Africa have the birthplace of Islam, the birthplace of Christianity. It is older there. Is it the version that went to Rome and the Grecofied that you're speaking of? So because we're the original people who contribute to all of these things. It's just that when we get it back, we're getting the wrong thing.
Well, I can even keep it simple than that. I understand exactly what you're saying. But if you look at those words and you look up the meaning of those words, remember I said words matter, or words are important. You look up the definition of Christianity and you read that definition, and you read the definition of Hebrewism or any word, but however, particularly since we're talking about the religion here, those words are not African words. And so, yes, it's clear. And I hear this, you know, the original man and woman of the earth was African. However, over time, that changed. And very similarly, the ideas changed over time too. They evolved. And they evolved to whatever the conditions of that particular environment it was. And so, yes, you do have still bits and pieces of that. But just think about it this way. If you're making apple pie, just because you have bananas and cherries in it, does it still make it an apple pie? You see what I'm saying? And so that's the idea with religion. First, okay, you know, we have to be a little bit more technical, or a little bit more understanding of words and what those words mean, and then again putting it within the context of Africa and the culture and environments of Africa. All right. And so that is the key thing. And that's what Afrocentricity allows you to do, which there's being a lot of tax on it. However, if you put it simply in those terms, then you're able to reason accordingly.
So no, we're gonna stop it here because we could talk another 2 days.
Okay.
Religion and spirituality, but I'm glad because we're able to, because people who are listening out there, we have a lot of people who are Christianified and Islamatized, and we always want to make sure our conversation is robust. So I think we're done here. Is there one more point you want to say before we go to education?
Yes, and just let me say this. One of the things is too, and this is one of the things I learned, and I'm glad we actually went over this subject dealing with religion, is that we have to be very careful. As you said, you have a lot of listeners, and I don't want to lose your listeners' ability to be able to do the research on their own or ask further questions. Because when I went through my African Rites of Passage program, matter of fact, religion was almost the last thing that we talked about. And so the idea was, if you're sitting in a synagogue, a mosque, or any other temple, whatever's being shared with you, at least you're able to raise questions and think about it and see how it applies to you, so that then you can make a decision. So I just want to leave that with your audience.
And the reason why they did it last was because it could cause lots of controversy and people would stop learning if you stay front. So thank you, and we'll continue the reasoning on that. Education. The reason why I say education, Carter G. Woodson often come to me and he said, the miseducation of the Negro. So I think it started with religion. When they gave us religion, they get to control our spirit and basically decolonize our spirit and control the mind, and where we go to heaven, where we go to hell. Once you control the mind, now you're having a school named Methodist School and that school. So talk to us about education, miseducation, and re-African centered education.
Well, I will say this. The first book that I actually wrote was Afrocentric Education, Public Schools versus Charter Schools. And I have a whole nother story behind that. However, I'll just jump directly into it, is that during that time, of course, charter schools were being talked about a lot, or other forms of education being discussed because of the motivation of our students in public schools and or charter schools. And charter schools, again, they were getting funded or receiving funds to then give parents an option to help students, again, that may not be as successful in the traditional US public educational system in terms of the public schools that exist. And so my view in terms of this is that, or my view in terms of education is, just again, as other students exist in the US educational system, whether it be, and it's just not that, it could be also other independent schools. We need to also bring into that environment, and this is the part, as you sort of referenced Carter G. Woodson, we need to bring into that environment our own thoughts, perceptions, knowledge, and ideas, such that when we're into that environment, we have a foundation, and then through that foundation, we are able to process the information and see whether or not it is useful. And this has, the idea of African-American education or African education has evolved over time. And I hear quite a lot, it's like, oh, we need to have our own schools. Yes, I totally agree. But in even that, again, the foundation for that should be, again, your own thoughts, perceptions, and ideas in reference to the culture and environments of the African continent. And I think a lot of that gets left out of this conversation. And I'm actually, my next book is actually speaking to that point. It's about the idea of, there was a term that I used or I created during my dissertation, and as I transitioned into my first book, was specific racial and ethnic cultural centers. So each group or each race has their own center, all right? But then at the same time, when they bring their own perceptions, their own thoughts, their own knowledge, their own behaviors, at the same time, that doesn't negate their ability to interact. Because you hear it a lot of times about, oh, well, we need to separate, or me sending my child to school is like, it's sort of like
segregation.
Bad. Yeah, it's bad or dangerous. Well, yes, if you think that way, yes, it can be very dangerous. However, if you provide your child, or the child is provided with the tools, then it's not. And so that's what I really want to say about education is we are aware of the racial interests. Now, the thing is, it can be done concurrently in education. For example, I'm an example of that. I went 18, 19 years of my life with only knowing what my parents taught me. And there's nothing wrong with that, but that's all I knew. I didn't know about the greater world and my presence and identity in the world until I went through an African Rites of Passage program in the university setting. And that is, if you're thinking about the mind, the African mind, that is one of the places that the African mind is totally lost in translation. And so that, it can be done. And that's the whole point with education is, what are the students bringing into that environment, such that whatever environment that they're in, how are they using that information for their own benefit and their interests?
One last thing on education, then we move to politics/economics. Sankofa.
Yes.
I want you to break it down. It's an ideology. So I never break it down for people as best as you can. You break down my name to the people.
Well, it's interesting because when you're thinking about Afrocentricity, actually, Afrocentricity involved out of Sankofa. So there's one way in which you can learn is a visual learning, and some people learn by some people learn by hearing, some people learn by seeing, and so I say that to say is that Sankofa, our people tend to learn many different ways. But visually, Sankofa, when you see that, because of course, something that's image is worth 1,000 words. Sankofa is a bird. And that bird is looking back behind itself with an egg in its mouth. And it symbolizes that how in short, you go back and get that which you have to be able to learn and grow and develop in the future. And so that concept of Sankofa relates to our ability to learn, teach, and grow. All right. So we don't lose what it is that we've had and evolved over generations. So you maintain your African culture, you maintain it by going back. You look at your strengths and your weaknesses. Okay, well, this worked. All right, we'll keep this. Well, this didn't work so much. All right, so maybe we need to get rid of this at this point in time, because it's not saying that idea or that thought may not come back around again, given the particular circumstance or situation that you're in. And so that is what Sankofa is. So visually, and putting that vision of that bird symbolically to also now connect to the words of, look, this is how you maintain your African culture. And then that today in the African-American sense, again, so Africans who dispersed from the African continent, we saw that same idea and we called that idea collectively Afrocentricity, and there's different approaches or different schools of thought in terms of our ability to maintain our culture.
That is said, and trust me, I'm glad you were here because I'm not giving them that definition. I just say go back and fetch it.
Right, go back and fetch, go back and get.
Yep, go back and get it, and
right.
and that's what we did. So here we are now.
But also the unsaid part or the implied part is you go back and get it so that again your future is bright, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the sort of the unsaid part. Yes.
So, I know. So when I teach, I don't give them everything. They need to go look that up. So go
right.
back. Sankofa. Yeah, because if we give them everything, doctor, you know what happens? They don't learn. They treat us like pastors.
You know, I agree. And it goes back to actually my book that I talk about in Afrocentric education. I was so excited, for example, when I was in the African Rites of Passage program. And at that point, Dr. Ashanti, who was an African traditional priest and healer, I wanted to know so much about religion. However, he told me the same thing you told me. He said, if I tell you everything, Hassiem, you will not learn anything. And to this day, I always remember that.
Yes, so that's powerful. So I don't know if you had the opportunity to watch the new documentary called Appy. It's about the economics and Baba Small is in it. A lot of powerful Africans from Kemet.
What's the name of the video?
Appy. It's a documentary and the economic powerful place we call the Nile.
Okay. No, I haven't. But go ahead.
Wow. When you watch it, you'll do like me and watch it 4 times.
Okay. Right.
And so this is where we set this up now. We're talking about politics. As an Afrocentric,
yeah.
We built our societies in a political structure that allow for economic success. And so now when we have our education and our spirituality, how can we now formulate a political Afrocentric system along with an economic one?
Well, politically, and that's the thing, Afrocentricity, politics is actually embedded in that. One of the political arms of that, or one of the indicator of politics is actually religion. And your religion speaks to, again, in essence, your culture that also speaks to then your lifestyle, right? So, for example, I used to work at a grocery store in North Carolina, and the grocery store that I used to work at was called Harris Teeter. Harris Teeter, for example, there was a whole section dealing with Hebrew national meats. At that time, I didn't even know what that was. All I know was when somebody came up and requested that, you know, we had to change our gloves, and there was a certain procedure that we had to go through to be able to provide the meat or whatever to those particular individuals. And so I say that, I use that as an example to say your religion, if you're practicing your own religion, it has the politics built in that, such that you know who your local representatives are, or you have meetings in your community with these members to then get the needs pushed. You then vote for all the offices that meet the needs that your community and family have. You live in that community such that all of that is develops the politics. So for example, I live again in Florida. I live on the south side of town. And I say that to say that on the south side of town, although we live all throughout Tallahassee, most of us are concentrated on the south side. I work in the community, I live in the community, I purchase in the community, and then all of that, then, as well as my politics in the community, matter. So if Just as if, so for example, if I pay tax dollars, we all pay taxes. If I pay tax dollars and I see something else in another community, I'm coming back to my local politician and saying, hey, I want the same thing. If a street sweeper is going in the morning and sweeping the streets, I want the same thing in my community. And so that is how religion speaks to politics, or your culture, how Afrocentricity speaks to that. It starts, again, the definition, I'll go back to it. It starts from you, and then from you, it comes out into your community. And that is what creates the politics. And that's what a lot of people miss, and why Afrocentricity is so important. You create, you are a creator, and then you define your environment. There you go. And another way of looking at it is the thought and behavior. But however, again, some of us can't see that because we see the problem is so complex. We won't even start from square one. And square one is defining yourself. So that's how your politics, you're talking about creating and developing politics that start from your culture.
So now let's get to economics, and I will bring you back to a time when exchange was bartering.
Right.
Negotiated. Now people call it haggling and they don't have the respect for it. But yet Africa started those things. Susu, in
socioeconomics, yeah.
They call it partner.
Right.
We develop our own economic system. Now we're here in so-called diaspora.
Right.
The bank won't give us loan. Our black banks sometimes are capitalists as well.
Right.
How do we retain some of these original ways? Because I think being self-determined and self-reliant may require us to practice some of those old practices.
Right. Well, those practices still exist. I've been fortunate to have, as you shared, I've been fortunate to travel throughout the African continent, and they exist today. One of the things that I see is, in terms of economic development, one of the ideas that's not perhaps talked about a lot is the idea of trust. And I spoke about that a little bit in reparations. In terms of economic development, we need to trust, well, and this may seem cliche-ish, is we need to trust ourselves first, and then trust in our ability to go over to the African continent, then trust in over there the systems that are already created and defined to bring in the goods and services that we need from the continent over to the US. And that's already done. It's to an extent, but it's not wholesale. And then, like you said, whatever resources we have here, using those internal resources to then add to that. To me, that's the hardest part. And I say that a lot, that the thing that may seem so simple in terms of the development of our thinking and in relation to our ability is one of the hardest part. That is the elephant, as I wrote in Reparations, the Afrocentric Pan-African approach. That is the elephant in our own backyard. That in and of itself. That you had, for example, Dr. Amos Wilson, who I did not meet. The brother passed way before I started coming into an African consciousness and learning more about myself. However, I'm aware of a book he wrote called Black Economics or something to that.
Blueprint? The Blueprint?
Yeah, the Blueprint of Black. That brother is so brilliant. Without even knowing, perhaps, about African culture and those systems that were created, he created in and of itself in essence, I would say, reinvented the wheel of how to create and define development in here within itself. Very similar to how how can I say, how the brother out of Tuskegee created his own school. And then when the people graduated, Booker T. Washington created his own blueprint. And then he sent those blueprints out to create their own schools. But after a while, right, as he passed, that connection was lost. And then as those who went out and built those schools, as they, faded away, that whole idea went away and vanquished, so to speak. But I say that to say that we have those ideas in place, and we need to be able to connect to them, connect back to them. For example, that was one of the first things I did when I went back to the continent. I went for the first time. I had graduated college. This was back in 2001. And this is when I met another elder for the first time, Dr. Malifi Kete Asante. When I was with my teacher, we were staying at the same hotel, but we were leaving or going somewhere, and he was also leaving with his wife at that time. And so I actually created, when I got there, I had my own clothing line. I met a seamster, Muslim brother there, and I created my own clothing line. So in the beginning, I was doing that. Matter of fact, all of my sales, believe it or not, and I learned this from him over there, a lot of my sales I got from non-Patara set or non-practitioners of African traditional religion, mostly Christians, mostly Muslims. And that was how I made money for a particular point in time, was connecting back to that market that was already there. And using those resources and things down here and connecting with the different communities to sell those things out.
Let me say this as you're talking about trade, because when the genocide happened, that was never a trade. That was genocide. But let's talk about some economic trade here. Okay. So the continent may be a billion too. Brazil is the next large African population. The Caribbean has a cluster of African population. Haiti, as some people call her, she has about 10 million by herself. Right. In America, we have about 40 million plus. In Canada, 1.2 million plus. But when we add them up, we're not a minority, we're a majority. What do you think it will take for us to trade with each other and build an economy?
Well, like I said, I always go back to the thinking. And actually in my new book, in this other book I'm writing dealing with actually changing, there's one thing, changing an African world is a precursor. Changing research for the African world is the thought. We part of being able to connect is first knowing those statistics that you talked about. However, more importantly, seeing that we are one people. That's the key thing. When I went to Ghana in 2001 for the first time, I got off the plane. Let me give you this example, brother, because I think it's very, very relevant. And it ties into the point I just made about, us being a majority globally in the African world, or what I use as the Yepete, is that when I got off the plane, and I remember I did not say a word. This is my first time. I was in awe to get off the plane and just see nothing but us. However, when I got off the plane and I had to get my luggage, at that time, there were people on the airport that would come up to you to try to, help you get your things and those types of things and move you. I never forget, I never said a word. I didn't say a word to nobody, but I overheard a brother from my ear, a Ghanaian brother. And he said to his other brother that, oh, he's African-American. And I still remember that to this day. And I say that to say that a lot of us, it's one thing to have the statistics and say it, but we don't see that. And so I have, in my new book, I'm actually looking at a book that Runoko Rashidi edited, the late great elder Runoko Rashidi and Chancellor Williams, I think, I apologize if I missed that, dealing with the African presence in Asia. And they have so many pictures.
Let me add to this because it's important. It's
Right.
Baba Ivan van Sertima.
Yes, it's very important. Thank you, Brother Ivan van Sertima. So they edited a book, and it talks about the African presence in Asia, and it provides pictures about that. And most importantly, though, right? And this is why earlier when I mentioned about the importance of race, like why race matters, because yes, race is a reality. Now, some of the people listening and may say, well, yeah, it is a reality socially and politically, but not biologically. I would say it matters on all three fronts. And I would say the reason why that idea is being talked down to is for this very reason. If we understand, for example, race, just that idea, then we begin to connect the dots, as what the late great John Henry Clark says, right? About Black, and in essence, he was talking about the idea of the word Black versus the idea of race. So you Black sort of tells you how you look, right? But doesn't let you know who you are. And so that is why it's so important with race and being able to connect. We have to provide not only the research. Once you get the research, then you have the education. But part of that education, as you speak to again, is you mentioned genocide. I like to use a word that most people don't like to hear, or I understand why, but I use the word brainwashing. People they've given up on their African beliefs. They don't know about them. And so you have to know about that to then use that on top of the research with the idea of Sankofa to then have the people even go out. That was one thing about Runoko Rashidi. He traveled. He went to those places. That's only one person. Now imagine if we were going on the wholesale masses, or just imagine if, and there's some that do, there's some churches that go over to different countries, but guess what? They're going there off of somebody else's. They're going over there to convert them over to white European economics and things of that nature versus their own that they don't know about. Yeah. So that's the thing. That's one of the things that I focus on is the research and the education, considering the circumstances and bringing the two together such then that you create the self-confidence to do that.
So good. I think it's a good time now. Now you have to follow my lead. I'm only going to give you 45 seconds on each book, because I still want them to purchase the books. Okay. So you're going to tell me them in order.
Okay.
And then each one of them, I'm giving you 45 seconds to let us know, give us a synopsis of each of them so we could have kind of a chronology.
Okay. All right. So my first book, of course, was was Afrocentric Education, Public Schools versus Charter Schools.
Yes.
And so in that book, essentially, I look at the different approaches of Afrocentricity and how they relate to, again, research and education. All right. And then I more specifically go into the particular approach that I was taught and the ways of research and education in that way to help parents and students as well sort of bring their culture to whatever US educational setting environment may exist. So that's Afrocentric education, public schools versus charter schools. Hopefully I summed that up in 45 seconds. Now, at the same time, I actually had a couple of manuscripts going at the same time, believe it or not, but I was traveling during that time, and so a lot was coming up. But my second book that I had was Afrocentric Reparations, the Afrocentric Pan-African Approach. And that too came out of my experience. One of the things that we, in terms of the learning that we did, one of the questions that was raised was, okay, now that you know that something happened to you, particularly in terms of African ancestral enslavement, how do you then go about taking that information and then using it for reparations? So based off that, I wrote a response to that question, all right, about how we can achieve reparations from an Afrocentric Pan-African perspective. And one of the things that I go into is, again, this idea of culture, the idea of intelligence. I say that we need to reclaim our race behaviors of intelligence. And what race behaviors of intelligence simply means is, again, if I go back to Africa and Center, and us speaking about focusing on Africa and the cultural contents of it, there are specific contents that matter. One of those that I mentioned was race earlier, but you also have philosophy. Thinking is important. Ideology, your behavior, okay? Religion, culture, rituals. Rituals are the education, all right? Weapons of war and media systems, all right? Those different ideas embedded in there, I sort of tease out and talk about those ideas in relation to reparations. So that was with my second book, Reparations, the Afrocentric Pan-African Approach. The third book, which occurred in and around that time too, but I released in 2021, last year, was Afrocentric Pan-Africanism, the power of God in religion. Because again, we know of religion, however, we don't know fully the power of religion, as I talked about. Religion is very, very powerful. And all those things that I named about before in terms of the cultural indicators that matter in terms of Afrocentric Pan-Africanism, religion creates those. So religion creates your race. So for example, I mentioned Ivan Van Sertima and Runoko Rashidi, the elders that passed. In their books, they give you example of some of the archaeological evidence of looking at the Buddha, for example. You see the features of race. So when you practice a religion, the human law says, right, and looking at it psychologically, is that you should practice, or you should serve and worship a God that looks like you, right? And so this is one of the things that I wanted to speak on and make clear about spirituality and religion, and then about the power of religion in reference to God. And so in that book also too is a visual test as well, to sort of help individuals navigate through that. And then my most recent book is Afrocentric, or the definitions, because as you said, Afrocentricity, there's been a lot of attacks. I've seen some of the attacks and things of that nature. But one of the main things that I want to say in regards to that is, and this is one thing that I learned from my teacher, and I'm very, very grateful, very, very grateful that I learned this, is as I was learning about Afrocentricity, in particular Afrocentric Pan-Africanism, and I was seeing a lot of the well-known scholars. Some of them didn't get along with each other, some of them did. Whatever differences or whatever perceived differences that my teacher had with anybody, he never, ever, ever, ever told me not to go to see anybody or not to read any of their writings or anything of that. Never. And I see that a lot, unfortunately, in this community, and it sets the community back. That's us in our own doing. This is not surely we have our circumstances in the environment, but this is not, this is not the white man. This is, so to speak, this is us.
Yes.
And I saw that. And so that's, in part, that's what I wrote this book, because I wanted us in the battle for our own African mind. I wanted us to come into our own and know about the different definitions that the elders have put out. And so that we can move on the choice and grow, because it's a process, right? And so that is why I put that out. I wanted to be clear about the definitions of Afrocentricity, which consists of Afrocentricity, African-centered, Afrocentric, Afrocentric, and then again, Afrocentric Pan-Africanism. So that was my latest book. And my upcoming book, I have a fifth book. It's called tentatively Changing Research for a Changing African World. That is hopefully going to be coming out in next year. So that's it. That's it.
So now, you know, I'm sorry to do this, but no, you're on the black seat or the black print. You're on the hot seat, my friend. I'm gonna call names because I'm old, so okay. I'm gonna call names. If you know the name, you could add to it. If you don't know the name, we move on.
Right.
So let's bring in some name here.
Right.
And I heard you mention some of them already. So let's bring in Marcus Garvey,
right.
Dr. Ben, and
right.
Dr. John Henry Clark. What's your thoughts?
Those were the master's teachers, you know. Now, my teacher trained under what I mean by he got information through them firsthand, you know, and I got information through them secondhand. And so, you know, a lot of they were it. They were the ones. That's, you know, that's who I'm a branch under. You know, a lot of it's the one thing I can say with a lot of us is we have a lot of information, and in the evolution of the different Afrocentric approaches, is saying, okay, how can we then reason and process this information to then make changes? And so they're very key in that evolutionary step.
Yes.
As all those that come before us, and as all those who will come, you know, that's the thing. We got to be able to adapt to our environment. Your environment is constantly changing. You need to be constantly changing.
So now I send you 3 more names.
Yes.
Dr. Miramba Ani, the Mahafa, the Mangamizi, Dr. Ancestor Francis Cress Welsing, Elder Neely Fuller Jr., the ISIS papers. What's your thoughts?
Again, that information was very important for individuals to have in order to be able to grow and develop. I've come across of Dr. Ani, come across of Dr. Francis Cress Welsing. I have not yet met Dr. Neely Fuller. I know about him only because I know that a lot of the writings that Dr. Francis Cress Welsing spoke about, she always gave reverence to Dr. Neely Fuller. So that's how I know of him.
I share. Yeah. So I'm going to take you now to places because, you know, as you're a writer, doctor, my brother, yes. You're a writer. So I'm going to take you to a place down in the continent of Abyssinia.
Yes.
The Battle of Adwa. Mm-hmm. Why was it so important?
Well, I don't know about that Battle of Adwa. So if you explain it to me, and give me some details,
I'll say it. I'll say it, but I'm moving on, my brother. I'll say it, and then I'm gonna have because I have 2 more. The Battle of Adwa was when Menelik unified Ethiopia,
Mhm.
and they had the historic defeat of the
Right.
Italians. They were
Right.
trying to colonize Ethiopia, Abyssinia. So
That's-
you already know what that means.
I do. I do. I
So,
do.
African repelling. So, but we have two more battles.
Right.
So, Asantewa Wars, the
Right.
Ashanti Wars, and also Queen Nzenga, those African women.
Right.
Why was those wars led by those African women important to today?
They're very, very important because obviously, naturally, right? You want to be able to control your own destiny, and in short, those wars occurred because the people realized that they were being encroached on, and they couldn't. They wanted to control their own destiny. They wanted to practice or do whatever they wanted to do and not be told what to do. So that's in essence how I see that in all of them. All of that incurred.
Powerful. So
Right.
let's go. I want to go to the USA now.
Yes.
There's a man named Nat Turner. Nat
Right.
Turner was a very powerful Christian. I kind of like his Christian. He said God told him to go basically kill the enslaver. What's your thought on that kind of African practice in Christianity?
Well, man, you said a lot. Well, actually, in my book, in Reparations, the Afrocentric Pan-African Approach, I actually speak to that because I saw a movie. Actually, I saw it when I was staying in Botswana for a little bit. I actually saw it over there about Nate Parker. And I have a different perspective about that. And the way I see it was that in the brother trying to cope with his environment, that he was trying to find some way through the religion to be able to do that. But at the same time, that coping ended up costing him his life, for example. And so this always goes back to, again, the idea that religion matters, and what you practice in that religion and what your God or your gods say matters, right? And so that therefore then why African culture and religion matter versus white culture and religion, because again he in his effort to get free, right? It still it ended up in the long run ended up costing him his life in essence. Yeah.
So people say we don't generational wealth, Black community, but let's talk a quick little bit. We had communities like Rosewood. We have about maybe 100 successful communities now become lakes and parks. Right. Black Wall Street was bombed.
Right.
What's your thoughts on how important for us to learn that we had successful Black communities, businesses, even during the Mahafa?
Right. Well, yes, we did. We had those things in the past. We've gone away from it because we've become, how can I say, assimilated, but not fully integrated into American culture. We will go to every other group of people for our needs, outside of going to our own people first. And as a result, that's why a lot of these businesses that still do exist, they end up closing down. And again, this is why I go back to the importance of my relationship with Sean and how this came about, and this brother having what is considered an African-owned business. And again, by me having a particular resource, by me being a manufacturer of a book, which is a bookstore, and then us creating a co-op together, that allows for the relationship to develop. But also too, the thing about that is, again, I go back to this idea of thinking, is the self-confidence for Sean to be able to open a bookstore. And so that is the thing that we're missing. We have, and this goes back, we have high self-esteem. I don't care how somebody puts it, racial self-esteem, whatever adjective you want to put into front of it, we have that. However, though, it's taking that to then be able to then even know that you can open up a business. Yes. And then developing those relationships that drive the business and maintain and allow both the business and you to grow. All right, so let's go to Haiti. So, you know, yes. When I'm here, the people say Haiti versus Haiti. In 1791, August 14th or thereabout, Dottie Bookman traveled from Jamaica. Cecil Fatima, they were Mambo Voodoo priest and priestess. They had a prior, Boy Kaima, and the revolution started. Right. And how important was that? 13-year struggle, African revolution, Haiti. Oh, it was very important. I mean, again, you have, you know, Haiti. So you have two countries on one isle. They're both African, really, again, they're both African countries in the Caribbean. You know, Haiti realized a long time ago, again, some of the things that other African countries realized once they interacted with other groups of people. And that is that they didn't want to be told what to do. And they didn't want to have people that were, trying to think of the word, people that were there to push the agenda, race agenda of somebody else versus their own. So again, these struggles that are occurring is that fight. And that's one thing I hear a lot about. I was watching actually a video on YouTube dealing with one of the Haitians individuals. And the way, of course, the news media may want to portray it. For example, just like the president that was recently assassinated there, as if, you know, we're not, I don't want to say we're not winning, as if we're not progressing, but we are.
Standard in the Qashqai.
And a lot of these struggles are what it is. A lot of these struggles are again, trying to, you know, push our race agenda, push for African people in Haiti and in Dominican Republic and in other places. So they're all one and the same. Matter of fact, that was one of the reasons. So what it was said that Malcolm X's grandson was actually in Mexico for, was there to help the Africans there in Mexico and with their movement. Oh, sure. So here we are, though. It's hard to talk to you because there's so much history in America. So I want to go to a place, but I can't go there without talking a little bit about history. Right. So as we know, Africans, and you know, people were enslaved and brought there. And ever since, they've been getting help. You know, whether it was the people, the patrol people, the people who lynched the people, whether it was the people, you know, as soon as they said we were free, they invented something new. And as soon as they say we're free again, then they had Jim Crow and all of that stuff. Now we're in an era, George Floyd. People couldn't just shoot us. You know, in Florida, that young man, Trayvon. Yes. So then we have, you know, just Africans. Even when we had the protests, Africans were still shot. Like, what do you have to say? Because it does happen in Canada, and we have our Albert Johnson, our Junior Manon, or our Eric Asawe. A lot of innocent lives here shot down in the street by the police force, you know, the police state in Canada. What do you have to say, though, about those Africans
who perished. Amadou Diallo.
Yeah. Well, first thing I want to say, I definitely remember the Trayvon Martin incident. I was actually in Ghana at that time, and I remember the over the news and watching that whole thing and the way it transpired. And it was a very what's the word? It was a very eye-opening.
Traumatic.
I would say, well, it can be traumatic, yes. I would say, let me say it this way. I wasn't happy about what was going on. And believe me, when I say unhappy, it doesn't mean I don't care or I have no emotions. I just recognize my emotions and not let what I see control them. And so when I saw that, I thought immediately about, again, the psychological and social conditioning that we've gone through, and that why there is a connection with, for example, what I call African ancestral enslavement and where we are today. I mean, we had to fight, and I'm using an American in a U.S. American context. Why, you know, if we didn't, the freedoms that we have right now to interact in this and over Zoom, it didn't just happen by happenstance. It wasn't where Africans in the modern day was brought to this country, and then all of a sudden the oppressors decided to give us freedom. No, we had to fight. And through that fighting, that caused us to prioritize less and less our African culture, so to speak. Mm. And so, you know, even though things are still happening, they're not happening to the extent where we have to operate in a survival consciousness. In other words, even though these killings are going on all the time, the people that do those killings, or the police officers, believe it or not, they don't think, and I have to be clear about this, and people will say, oh, he's oversimplifying this. However, they don't think like that all the time. In other words, if yes, they do, individuals can do these particular behaviors, but it's not like if you're getting ready to lay down in bed, all of a sudden, as you close your eyes, you're thinking about hurting someone or taking someone out. And so I use that preface, that example, to say that, yes, we need to be aware of that. However, if that's all we talk about, to the extent that you're thinking about that 24 hours a day, such as talking about white supremacy and white, and you know, any other idea about that, then you become crippled. And then you really fall into a situation where you're allowing your emotions and your anger to dictate your decisions versus being able to plan now for the future. And I say that to say is we don't need, yeah, you need to know about the law, but you don't, when these incidents happen, for example, you see people pop up on YouTube or talk about, oh, we need to teach our children about how to engage police officers, or about the right way of approaching the officer. Well, yes, but that comes out of your own culture. For example, when I get pulled over, if I get pulled over, I say, for example, if I get pulled over, my thought is I'm not automatically going to, man, this police officer is bad, or this situation. In other words, I'm in control of the situation. And that's the thing that I want everybody to understand. Not that these officers shouldn't be punished, or people shouldn't be punished if they do wrong. Yes, they should. But on the other side of that coin, what can we do such that we're not even in those situations to begin with? Or if we're in that situation, then how do we resolve the situation? And I'm using the word situation specifically because a situation can escalate to a problem, but it doesn't have to if you are in control of the situation.
So I'm putting on my revolutionary hat now. We have to push back. We are gonna rebut.
Right.
So here it is.
Right.
Can we do all things at the same time as Africans? So it's not one or the other.
Right.
I must defeat white supremacy and racism off the face of planet Earth every day, as well as I need to have a strong spirituality, religion. I also need to have our African-centered education.
Right.
Because one of the elders and the ancestor told me that if white supremacy and racism is not rid of planet Earth, we'll have the same reason in 100 years from now. And our children will still die. And they don't just die by physical bullets.
Right.
They die by brainwashing and all of that. Should we be doing all of it at the same time, my brother?
Well, I would say this: if you got the way that I understand the world, for example, I was trained in Western psychological science and also African-centric science. The way that I understand things is the thought must come first. And so therefore, if your thinking comes with the idea of white supremacy, then everything after that is sort of you're spinning your wheels. And so that is why it is through the thinking within your own culture that you come up with remedies and things to handle certain situations. And then, yes, it will be a process, because instead of the process being trying to rid the earth of the idea of white supremacy, you're trying to teach the idea of sanctify, to then teach yourself, the next generation, so on and so on. Because again, we live in a reality where there are all groups of people, and some people are good, some people are bad, but still you got to be able to interact with them, you know? And so that is my thinking. That is how I see it. And yes, it is a process. You know, if it's a process to where we got to this point, it's a process by which we're also going to find a solution or have a solution.
So yes, so you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to continue, but the reason why I wanted to also say this, your camera, your picture is kind of now clouded. So I don't know what has happened. And so the beautiful people like, where is this beautiful face? It has become opaque.
Okay.
Yes. So, you're black.
I'm back. Yes, sir.
So it's funny, as you were speaking, I am agreeing with you that when I say defeat something, it means using your own concepts. Right. And so I think sometimes we're saying the same language, but we're receiving it differently. Because my idea of defeating something is developing our own communal systems. Right. In loving each other, where we'll have absolutely no crime committed by self to self. You know what I mean? All of that is the defeat of that. So I think we are saying the same thing. So now I want you, now you are an elder. You are now 75 years old. Right. You have grown your beard. The elders have passed on eldership to you. And I come to you at this age, at this point in time. I was in Ghana, and an elder there told me that reparations, the cost of it, but not just the minimum, was $777 trillion to African people. Right. But I know you will have your concept. So I'm going to give you the floor to give us a minute or two. And I know you wanted to do this in 2 hours, but you cannot. 2 minutes maximum for your reparations claim.
Well, my reparations claim is simple. We are still suffering from what the United States has expressed in terms of the lingering consequences of ancestral enslavement. And I say we specifically, to be more, to form the connection and for it to be clear, we suffer from slavery, post-traumatic slave disorder. So slavery is what occurred with the ancestors, physical containment and things of that nature. And that ended in 1865, right? Or 64 with the Civil Rights Act. And then after that, as you spoke to earlier, the Black codes and things of that nature that still, although we were free from the bondages, we still had to continue to fight, and we fought even up to 1953. And then thereafter, right? We have not, there has been no treatment for this. And that's the connection. That's the connect. We suffer from not being able to practice our African culture and still being transgressed in American society, where we still have to fight for our rights, not even thinking about healing from our own African culture. And so that's the thing. That's what I call for. Until that is the formative quality for reparations, and until that healing occurs, they can decide. They can give money, just like the U.S. government has shipped to the Russia and Ukraine, as they have shipped every 3 months or so to Afghanistan back in the day. They can give the money. We have programs, but what I'm speaking about is we have not addressed this, and until that is addressed, we have not remedied the past in that way.
Yeah. So it is all of this is a journey. Now
Right.
I'm a little bit radical, so I have to put my ideas to you, and you will put it into your ideas. So
Right.
I feel that as Africans, we need to exit these organizations such as the UN, WTO, and IMF, World Bank, because somehow they are allowing France to still take money from quote unquote French African countries, like money that they don't have, still attacking governments in Mali and Ivory Coast. And all of them have been doing this. And these organizations, I know, were part of the control mechanism. What's your thought? Is that part of reparations, or we work with them?
Well, my thought initially is that, my thinking used to be very similar to that. In other words, to be independent and happy, I used to always think that I needed to, a while back, I would think that I would need to remove myself from the environment in that way. But what happens is that could perhaps be one way, but it may not be the best way. And let me explain, is that there are a lot of groups in organization and groups, and a lot of times they infiltrate other groups to see what is going on so that they can bring that information back to their racial group. But again, if they don't have that type of thinking or ability to do that, then they stay in that organization and nothing grows. So organizations like the IMF Bank, these organizations exist. And of course, yeah, you can just say, you don't want to be a part of it. However, is there something useful that the IMF has that can benefit and grow, for example, your organization or your plan? So that's the way I see that. Because often too, that's an approach even with education, as I mentioned earlier, was, we need to be left alone. I hear that. Or we need to be on our own or have our own. Yes, you do. But again, if the thinking's not right, your thinking is, you're to the point of not interacting, to the point of insanity. So that's how I see things, is that you find how you can utilize resources for your own needs as well.
Beautiful. So you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna take your Afrocentric education part, and then I'm gonna close off Africa. We might have a little bit of disagreement with that, but
right, and that's fine. Yeah, yes.
I like the fact that we need African minds have to get right for us to change our condition. So I mean, agree on that. Could you tell us what's next for you, my good brother? What's next for you?
Wow, what's next? Well, again, as I mentioned, I'm working on releasing that next book. That's what's next. In terms of that, I also plan to go back to the continent. I wanted to really go back to Botswana. I've been there several different times, and I really enjoy that country. So I would definitely love to go back and visit and continue to do research. One of the things that I've been working on is I wanted to do a second follow-up book or another book dealing with naming rituals. You know, there's a lot of book names, as I told you, as I got my name from Dr. Malifi Kete Asante's book, where my mother brought his book from a bookstore, and then she chose me names from that book. And so I wanted to talk about African names and naming rituals. So that was one of the things where I wanted to go back and do some more research on the continent in that way. So that's what I have, you know, in the near future coming up.
I'm here looking at my bookshelf, looking for that book because I recently saw the name in book, but I can't find it. So, you know, books and
it's
books.
funny because I still have that book to this day. And some of the students, and I've been fortunate to teach in academia for at least 12 years now. And all the students that I've had that, you know, ended up having relationships and having children, I've actually given them that book too as well. I said, you know, have you ever thought about any African names for your child? And so I would give them that book, and I would tell them, you know, look into the book, but make sure you give me my book back. You know.
So if somebody wants to get a book, I know Knowledge has the book here, but and if somebody want to get a hold of you, because people are interested in studies, develop even rites of passage at your academic space, since Elder Ashanti had done that. Is that something you're even contemplating on doing, to pass on that rites of passage?
I have, and I do it every day in parts with my students as well, because again, in teaching, it's a group of students. So it's not the same, of course, being structured in a psychotherapeutic setting. However, it's still a way by which I can share information in a group setting. And actually, my first book actually speaks to that. That was the whole intent, was I wanted to provide a blueprint of my understanding of the Afrocentric Pan-African Rites of Passage program that I went to, so that somebody can pick it up as well and take the different weeks and create an African Rites of Passage program, or add to. And then I also put my phone number as well and contact information in that book. And I've received a couple of calls too as well in regards to it, since that book has been out since 2014. So
could I, and you could give me credit, or you don't have to give me credit, but the second edition of that book, could you call it the Black print, please?
Which one? Which book are you referring to, brother?
Any book you call blue, just call it the Black print.
Oh, okay, I see. Okay, yes, sir.
Just call it the Black print, because, you know, when we're creating things for melanated people, it's like print. So I have a documentary called The Black Print.
And you know that's interesting too, that you brought that up. And because, again, just going back to this idea about race, and there being so much confusion on it, and that's one of the things that I'm bringing up in my new book, dealing with changing research in the African world, is looking at race and specifically talking about that idea of melanin and melanation.
Yeah. That's powerful, man. And so I think we're going to continue to follow your work, because anytime I see Afrocentric, African-centered, I don't fight with no philosophy. I just want to learn all philosophies, because it's African, it must be great. If you had to say something to the listeners outside before we go to Q&A, what would you say to the listeners on YouTube, our Tube, IG, their G, Facebook, Metaverse. What would you say?
Thank you for listening. And hopefully some of the information that you have listened to that you found useful. And what I'm realizing, and again, why I'm writing this next book is because those environments, those those computer or internet environments, most of our students are learning from. They're learning more about African history and culture through these types of settings versus being in the public school system, which is why it's important that we really look to changing how we do research and education in the African world.
Ashe. And you're on the internet. Do you have some IG, what they call this handle?
No, I don't have an IG handle. I am on Facebook. I am on YouTube. Those are the two current
forms.
Yes, that I use. However, probably will expand out more because I'm not against technology. Technology is important.
Could you drop your link in the chat and so people could grab it?
Yes, I'll do that right now.
So Brother Sean, could you come back on, please? Because we need to see what's going on. How much of those books you have in the bookstore, people are lining up spiritually, mentally, re-educationally I need some of those books. So Brother Sean, when you're ready, come back. Brother Sean is also conducting business.
Yeah, the brother is multitasked.
Yes, and anyone else can also come on. Since Brother Sean, whoever is listening, come on. And if you have any questions.
Yes, Uncle, I think there was a question in the chat there.
What was it?
About multiple. No, the other one about the police. Did you guys deal with that?
No, we didn't deal with it. Let's see if let me take a look. Yes, let's see what the police talk is. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to go to the chat. Sometimes I'm trying to find the chat by chatting and it won't happen. So here's what it says here. When you didn't see, okay, that's one. Please explain more about the officers' behaviors. It sounds like you are defending them. Well,
Right.
Well, I probably didn't necessarily think you are, but go ahead. I won't speak for you.
No, definitely. I'm not, what's the word? As I said before, I'm not happy about what has transpired with our African brothers and sisters. And nor am I excusing the officer's behavior. I'm looking at a way to solve the problem. And one of the ways that we can solve the problem is also to focusing on our actions and what we can do to remedy the problem. So that was my whole point. It's definitely not excusing any behavior that happened. It's looking more so towards a solution and how we can resolve this problem that's occurring.
And I think I know why some people might have even thought that, because some of the brothers who have been killed didn't do what they, one of them was saying to somebody, listen, I have a firearm on me. And they shot some people. They weren't participating active. I come from a place called Jamaica. I learned quickly how I engage with the police, white or black.
Right.
I was in Haiti. Police is dragging women, I was getting kind of excited, telling the police, what you doing? And then my friend Ras Eddie said, hey, calm yourself. Right? So police, I don't even like, I have a brother who's a police and I don't even like police. And I'm telling that to the police. But I'm respectful of their job. Right. And I'm not going to think that if I behave myself, and I always behave, I'm always respectful, that I won't be shot. And I think that's what somebody might be construing of you, thinking you're agreeing for something, but I don't think you are.
No. And I think you summed up the point very, very well. And it's interesting, you told me about your interaction in Haiti. And I want to go on the record to say I was a high school counselor prior or right upon me finishing my Ph.D. And I will never forget. And at that time, I was primed. And what I mean is that, yes, I was considered maybe at that point, revolutionary, I could say, perhaps. And like you, I saw there was a fight that broke out. And I saw a police officer sort of mishandle this sister. And it took every ounce in my body not to go over there. And instead of somebody telling me to calm myself, I reasoned in my head to calm myself. And I remember afterwards having a conversation with Dr. Ashanti about that and telling him about that. And he said, that's good you were able to do that, because the situation could have been made worse instead of better. Or the situation could have escalated more than, and then probably the sister could have lost her life. You know, anything could have happened between you and the officer. It could have been anything. In other words, that you have to pick. There's always the expression, you got to pick and choose your battles. And at that point in time, wasn't the right time to pick that battle. Now, the sister wasn't beaten or anything of that nature, but the way that the police officer handled her, I mean, he's like 6'5", 200 something pounds. The young sister was 125 at 5'4". And I just felt that that was inappropriate.
Yeah. So no, man, I think for me, I think we might have different strategies.
Right.
I think it's okay to have different strategies. You know, while I come out of the UN, you might want to stay in there and work within it to exact changes while I burn it down from the outside. But it's all part of the same love strategy.
And that's a beautiful thing. And that's why you cannot forsake what the elders have done in the past, because all those different strategies have gotten us to where we are today. And it's important that you have those strategies so you can reason what your next steps are.
Sure. Brother Sean, anything more? What do you have to say? Because you get to, he's on the hot seat now, so you get to ask a hard-hitting question, Brother Sean.
Before I get to that, I think there's another question about the meaning of his name here.
Okay. So Hassiem is an East African name, and it means strong. Ayali is also an East African name from the Oromo ethnic group in Ethiopia, which I've traveled to Ethiopia and I got many stories, so maybe we'll talk about that. It means confident. Ayali is confident. And then Kambui is from the Kikuyu ethnic group in East Africa, and it means fearless.
Kenya, Ma, warriors.
Right, which I talk about in my book as well.
So, Brother Sean.
Yes. Well, Hassiem, I love the idea that, you know, how you focus in the definitions of words that we use. And a lot of times people don't completely comprehend the meaning of the words, you know, what's behind it. So I like the idea that you've taken the time to do that. And I'm looking forward to jumping into the definitions, right? Yes. So that's good. I think what I really loved about reparations, I also love the psychological aspect that you dealt with in the book there, because I think psychology is a huge portion of what we have to deal with as a people, right? I think spirituality and psychology, for me, they're the top two things that we have to deal with as a people for us to be able to progress, right? So do you see yourself dealing with any more topics that really delve into the psychology of things?
Yes, I mean, all the time, I always try to take the Afrocentric Pan-African approach, or the theory that I've learned, and tie it into other ideas to make it relevant and usable. That's one thing about us in academia, is that when a theory is developed, a theory, it should change and it should meet rigor. And so in that way, you have to look at different ideas and how ideas relate to your particular theory, and you then have to change and adapt your theory such that it makes sense and stays relevant. And so, yes, to make the answer shorter, yes, I do plan to dive into other ideas. However, the way that I approach those ideas is from the common point of an Afrocentric Pan-African approach.
Brother Sean, how many of the books do you have in store right now?
I have all 3 titles right now.
But not the fourth, but not the 4th and the 5th, not even the ones, the 6th and the 7th either. They're all in.
Well, he does have the 4th one, but I don't. The 5th one, not yet. I don't think. I haven't finished that one yet.
You haven't finished that one yet.
Yeah.
Well, I know you'll surprise me. So
yes. And again, please, any listeners in Toronto, please support Brother Sean. Thank you, Brother Sean, for having me on the platform. I really appreciate that. Wow. This is how economics works. It starts, you know, people think it has to start big. It's steps, it's process. So just imagine now, just from this, how many people will go in there and shop with Brother Sean, and how many of those people will recommend other people and bring other people into it. It's a process.
That sounds like community to me too. Right? Yes. When you start building like that, and you're building community.
Exactly.
Right? You're building relationships.
Right. And so here's my African brother in Toronto, and I'm here in the United States, and we're networking as African people.
Hey, do you have any study group?
I don't. I have actually. You say you're Jamaican. I have a really good friend. She's Jamaican as well. Oftentimes I bounce ideas off of her and different things, and she shares some ideas with me as well. So that's my study group. But ever since my teacher passed, it's interesting how, things that that are shared with you. It's sort of like when you have an elder, and he tells you a lot of things, or your parent, they tell you a lot of things, and you don't necessarily think about it. And then when you no longer see that person anymore, those things come rushing back into your brain. That's how it's been a lot of times.
Yeah, Hassiem, it seems like you might be, there might be something about you, because there's a question as to whether you have any family that relates back to Antigua, St. Lucia.
Well, I don't know. It's interesting. I traced my mom's family tree back. My mom's family at least came into the country through Alabama, traced back to 1827. However, I don't know if at any point in that time, if any of the relatives possibly came again from the Caribbean into here. I don't know. But I do know that my dad, on my dad's side of the family, he is Nigerian. And so I've been through Nigeria. I haven't stayed there. I was actually going through there to go somewhere else. But my plan is actually to go back to Nigeria. And I have some stories too as well about being in Ghana, West Africa, and being approached by Hausa people and Nigerian people, and them speaking to me in Hausa and telling me how I look like their cousin. So so that's what's
so the answer is yes, it's true. You have relatives in St. Lucia, Antigua, St. Kitts, Nevis, Trinidad, Tobago, everywhere. Because you're one family.
Brother Sankofa, doesn't he resemble Brother Derek a bit?
Yeah, they have roots.
Brother Derek Williams.
Yeah.
Hey, yes. We all have a twin somewhere, bro.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, is there any more question on the people on this call? Because we always want to give you an opportunity, because you join us on the Zoomology 101. So we're gonna give about 15-20 seconds, and then we are gonna ask our good brother to go and full joy the sun rays.
Yeah, they were flashing through my window a little bit.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Beautiful day indeed.
So, Brother Sean, could you give us the address and this website, because people know, my good brother, doctor, you know, people don't have to come to the store anymore. They could just order online. I'm telling you.
Order online or call up. That's one thing I like about Brother Sean. When you call, he picks up.
Yeah, so brother, give the information, Brother Sean.
Okay, so for those of you that wants to order online, you can find Brother Hassiem's book at knowledgebookstore.com. You can visit us at 177 Queen Street West, and that's in Brampton. Not Toronto, but Brampton.
Oh, it's Brampton. Okay, all right.
Yeah, it's in Brampton. We're outside of Toronto.
Okay.
Right?
Well, Brother Sean, I have to interrupt you, because one time I gave somebody the information and they couldn't find the place. They were driving around for an hour.
Toronto?
And, where are you? And they're downtown Toronto.
Yes, we have to do that since Queen Street exists elsewhere. So,
okay.
Right? You can just give us a call at 905-459-9875, and we can figure things out, you know, on the telephone, right? So whatever your preference is, you can do it.
I saw somebody in the chat says, and this is where we always have to teach. Somebody said West African and West Indies roots. And I say, no. It's Pan-African roots. It's the East. It's the Africans from the Southern that went to the East. It is the East that come back to the West. It is the West that come and the East that come to Canada, Jamaica. We are one people.
Right. Well, you have to know there's been many migrations over the years, you know. And so, yeah, at different points in times, the Africans came throughout the globe. Yeah.
And so I tell people, when people try to tribalize me, I said, no. I am Dagumba, I'm Ga, I'm Fanti, I'm Hausa. I am Yoruba. I am Jamaican. I am not Canadian, however, but I am African in Canada. And yes, and I'm African everywhere that African is. And so one day we hope to have a global, Pan-African, global family reunion where we could build our societies again using Afrocentric concepts, spiritual concepts, and contribute to our own economies of scale globally. So thank you, my brother. And I'll give you the last word. I'm going to give you the last word before we exit stage right and left. Go ahead, brother.
Oh, I apologize. I didn't know. I lost you for a second.
You're the guest.
Yeah, I am your guest. Again, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. Hopefully I can come back again and go a little bit more in detail with my books and some of the things that I talk about. And perhaps even too, I know I've been asked to do a more regular series on YouTube. So it's just a matter of me making time to be able to do that. So again, just thank you for having me.
Ashe. Brother Sean, just before we exit, could you also, is there a date selected for the next Knowledge Spotlight?
The next Knowledge Spotlight, oh my, my head, it's 2 weeks from today.
So people, Brother Sean, like you to use your brain, calculate 2 Saturdays from now. Do we know who? Are we still planning on that?
The who, not as yet.
Not as yet.
Okay. There's a few people that I'm waiting to get back to me. So.
Okay, wonderful. So with all said, it's been a pleasure. It is good to eat from the African dish and the African plate. Everybody have a wonderful day. And as they say, now I'm tired and I have to go rest. One love.
Bless.
Bless.
Thank you.